Have you ever wondered how a small act of kindness could change someone's entire life? In today's story, we'll take you on an incredible journey with young Daniel, an 8-year-old boy who found solace in the pages of his books and a quiet park. What starts as a simple routine transforms into an inspiring tale of connection, compassion, and unexpected friendships. You'll see how Daniel's unspoken kindness reaches across generations, mending broken relationships and bringing light to those who thought hope was lost. Get ready to witness moments of happiness, sadness, and ultimately heartwarming fulfillment, as this story reminds us all of the power of love and understanding. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Every single morning, like clockwork, young Daniel made his way to the park with a quiet determination, his heart brimming with an unspoken kindness. Despite being only 8 years old, Daniel's world was colored with a richness and depth that many grown-ups couldn't even begin to comprehend. The park was his sanctuary, where the soft rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze and the melodic songs of sparrows composed the symphony that accompanied his every step. Daniel wasn't like the other kids his age. His small, slender frame and oversized glasses made him seem fragile, but his wide, curious brown eyes held the wonder of 1,000 worlds. His walk was hurried, awkward almost as if he was racing towards an adventure that awaited him in a distant land, a place that only his vivid imagination could conjure. You see, books were more than mere objects to Daniel. They were gateways to realms where he could become anything he dreamed of: a fearless knight, an intrepid explorer, or a wise king, guiding his people with strength and compassion. His mother would often sigh deeply, watching him disappear into the pages of yet another story. "How much longer are you going to keep reading?" she'd ask, concern lacing her voice. "Your eyes are already suffering from all that reading, and look, your friend is outside, throwing pebbles at the window, begging you to come play. But you don't even care." His father, on the other hand, would only shake his head in disapproval. "It's because of your upbringing," he'd grumble. "When I was his age, I couldn't wait to be outside, helping my father, building things with my hands, going fishing. But this boy, he's lost in his books, knows nothing of the real world, completely impractical, always with his head in the clouds." The constant bickering of his parents was a soundtrack to Daniel's life, a harsh reminder of the dissonance in his world. But he had found his escape. His fantasies were a fortress where he could hide from the endless arguments and the loneliness that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Each day after school, while other children raced to playgrounds or played in the streets, Daniel would quietly slip away to his beloved park. There, beneath the towering oak that stood proudly like a guardian of forgotten dreams, he would lose himself in the pages of his books. The golden hues of mid-September cast a gentle glow over the park, and Daniel could feel the subtle change in the air as the warmth of summer gave way to the cool embrace of autumn. His favorite spot was a bench nestled under that mighty oak, and it was here that he would sit for hours, absorbed in his stories, dreaming of far-off places and loyal companions. Today, it was Eric Knight's Lassie that captured his heart. Each word pulled him deeper into a tale of unwavering loyalty and bravery, qualities that resonated deeply with a boy who longed for a true friend. For Daniel, the story was more than just an escape. It was a reflection of his own desires, a yearning for a bond that transcended the loneliness of his reality. He dreamed of having a dog of his own, a loyal companion who would stand by his side no matter what, sharing in his joys and comforting him in his sorrows. In his mind, he could see it so clearly: a dog that would be his faithful friend, even if all he had to offer was a crust of bread. But reality, as always, was far less forgiving. Despite Daniel's heartfelt pleas, his father remained unyielding. "No," he would say, his voice firm and final. "All a dog brings is hair and trouble. They need feeding, walking, too much responsibility for nothing in return. There will be no dogs in this house." And so Daniel's love for animals remained distant, something he could only nurture through the pages of his books, where stories of brave dogs and loyal pets filled the void left by the absence of a real companion. As he sat there on the bench, lost in the adventures of Lassie, Daniel's heart swelled with admiration for the dog's courage and determination. She faced challenges that seemed insurmountable, yet she never wavered in her loyalty. For Daniel, this was the kind of companionship he longed for, a bond that could weather any storm, a friendship that would stand the test of time. But fate, with its cruel twists, often leads people down paths they never imagined. Life, Daniel was beginning to understand, could be hard, unforgiving even. And sometimes, when fate dealt a particularly harsh blow, people were forced to make sacrifices they never thought they'd have to. For some, it meant swallowing their pride, bowing their heads, and doing whatever it took to keep their loved ones safe from the cold, unforgiving grip of hunger and despair. And as Daniel read about Lassie's trials, he couldn't help but feel the weight of that truth, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. As Daniel immersed himself in the pages of his book, he couldn't help but envy the characters whose lives seemed so full of companionship and adventure. These heroes, with their unwavering friends and allies, never knew the loneliness that clung to Daniel like a shadow. This yearning for connection only deepened his longing to one day find a friend like the loyal Lassie, a friend who would stand by his side through every storm. Lost in this reverie, Daniel barely noticed the passage of time. The park, once bustling with life, began to grow quiet. The distant hum of the city was just a faint whisper now, unable to penetrate the tranquility of his hidden refuge beneath the grand oak tree. It was here, in this secluded corner of the park, that Daniel felt a sense of freedom he couldn't find anywhere else. Here, reality faded away, and for a few precious hours, he could escape into a world of dreams. But a sudden noise snapped him out of his daydream. Reluctantly, he tore his eyes from the comforting lines of his book and looked around. At first, everything seemed just as it had been moments ago. The sparrows still chirped happily as they splashed in the remnants of rainwater. Leaves continued their quiet conversation with the wind, and a few women, thin and determined, jogged by with their headphones on, as if trying to outrun time itself. Yet something had changed. Out of the corner of his eye, Daniel noticed a man sitting on a nearby bench. The man's appearance was rough, to say the least. He wore clothes that had clearly seen better days, a thick beard covering most of his face, and shoes so worn that Daniel could see the holes in them. Yet, despite his shabby exterior, the man's face held a certain gentleness, and his eyes sparkled with a kind of warmth that caught Daniel's attention. He might have gone unnoticed if it weren't for the large black dog sitting beside him, wagging its tail with unbridled enthusiasm. "Are you hot, buddy?" the man asked the dog, his voice full of affection as he gently stroked the animal's head. "Want to play? Here, fetch this stick," he added with a soft smile, tossing a stick across the grass. The dog bounded after it with uncontainable excitement, tail wagging furiously as it sprinted back, eager for the game to continue. As Daniel watched, he couldn't help but notice how much the man and his dog resembled one another. Both seemed to bear the scars of life's hardships, the man in his tattered clothing and the dog in its matted fur. Yet, despite their rough appearance, they radiated a warmth that stood in stark contrast to the harshness of their surroundings. The joy in their eyes, the laughter they shared, seemed to shine even brighter against the backdrop of their evident struggles. There was a contentment between them that Daniel found both fascinating and heartwarming. After a few more rounds of throwing and fetching, the man decided it was time for a break. Reaching into the pockets of his worn coat, he pulled out a loaf of bread, a bottle of water, and a pack of kefir. With the same care and kindness he had shown his dog, the man carefully broke the loaf in half, handing one piece to his loyal companion. He then unscrewed the bottle of water, pouring some into a plastic cup, and set it down in front of the dog. As for himself, he took small sips of kefir, his eyes occasionally drifting over the park, as if he was taking in the simple beauty of the moment. To Daniel, this scene was more than just a man sharing a meal with his dog. It was a glimpse into a bond that transcended words, a connection that didn't rely on material wealth or social status. In that moment, he realized that true friendship could be found in the most unexpected places, even in the face of adversity. And as he watched the man and his dog share their humble meal, Daniel's heart swelled with hope. Hoped that one day he too might find a companion who would love him as unconditionally as that dog loved its owner. After finishing their simple meal, the man glanced at the dog beside him and softly said, "Well, my friend, our break is over. It's time to get back to what we do." With a gentle pat on the dog's head, the man stood up and began walking toward the park's exit. The dog, ever loyal, followed closely at his heels, without hesitation or command, as if their connection was wordless but deep, woven through years of shared moments. Daniel, who had been quietly observing the entire scene from his spot under the oak tree, couldn't tear his gaze away from them. A smile slowly spread across his face as he watched their figures retreat into the distance. In that moment, a budding sense of hope began to take root in his heart, hope for a friendship so pure and simple. This, he thought with a deep sense of contentment, is what true friendship looks like. His eyes shone with newfound understanding. True freedom, he mused, isn't found in grand gestures or endless riches, but in the quiet joy of sharing simple moments. Sitting on an old, worn bench under the shade of a tree, breaking bread with a loyal friend, this is the essence of happiness. Playing without a care in the world, forgetting everything else. Because you have someone beside you who understands you completely and stands by you, no matter what. These reflections filled Daniel with a warm glow that spread through his chest. He smiled to himself, lost in thoughts of a future where he, too, would have such a faithful companion. One day, he whispered to the wind, "When I'm grown and living on my own, I'll have a dog. We'll walk through this very park together, sharing every piece of bread, every joy, every sorrow." But the real world, as it often does, soon intruded upon his daydreams. The evening had slipped into night by the time Daniel returned home. He secretly hoped his parents would be too preoccupied to notice how long he'd been gone. The warmth of the September night still lingered, wrapping him in a comforting embrace. As he climbed into bed, he found himself eagerly anticipating the next day, looking forward to losing himself once again in the world of Lassie's adventures, and perhaps catching another glimpse of the man and his dog. The park had become Daniel's daily refuge, a sanctuary where he could escape the noise of life. He told his parents he was meeting friends, but in truth, he spent his time alone on that familiar bench, absorbed in his books and watching the old man and his dog. Like clockwork, they appeared at the same time every day, and each day unfolded like a scene from a well-rehearsed play. They would play together, share their meager food, and bask in each other's company, their bond a testament to the power of simple, unspoken love. As the days passed, Daniel's admiration for the old man grew. He marveled at the gentle care with which the man treated the dog, as though it were an equal, deserving of the same respect and affection. To Daniel, their relationship seemed like the perfect embodiment of understanding and support, a quiet, enduring partnership reminiscent of a couple who had weathered life's storms together and emerged stronger, forgiving all past grievances and simply enjoying the precious moments they still had. Day after day, Daniel watched them from his hidden spot among the trees, his heart swelling with light and warmth each time he saw their quiet happiness. Their presence gave him hope and strength, a reminder that even in a world filled with uncertainty, there was still room for dreams. And Daniel dreamed of the day when he would find his own loyal friend, a companion with whom he could share the world. But today, as Daniel sat under the oak tree, something felt different. He opened his book, but his eyes kept drifting back to the bench where the man and his dog usually sat. His heart sank when he noticed that it was empty. A sense of loss washed over him. Maybe they won't come back, he thought. a sadness settling over him like a heavy blanket. He realized how little he knew about the pair who had become a part of his daily life, part of the dream world he had built in his mind. Just then, a soft sound broke through his thoughts. Daniel looked down and saw something small and worn lying at his feet. It was a stuffed toy, an old, ragged dog that had clearly been lost by someone. He picked it up, feeling the rough, well-loved texture of the plush under his fingers. The toy had a frayed collar, and as Daniel held it in his hands, a thought struck him. Maybe this was a sign. It felt like a gentle reminder that life was full of unexpected moments, that sometimes what seemed like a coincidence was anything but. Perhaps this small toy was a message, telling him that everyone is destined to find a friend in this world. And maybe, just maybe, it was a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness could ripple out and change someone's life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Lost in these thoughts, Daniel glanced toward the horizon, where the last golden rays of the sun were casting a warm glow over the leaves of the old oak tree. The wind stirred the pages of his book, and Daniel smiled. Maybe tomorrow would be the day. Maybe tomorrow he would meet his own loyal companion, the friend he had been dreaming of. With a renewed sense of hope filling his heart, Daniel returned to his reading, letting the soft rustling of the oak leaves lull him into dreams of a brighter, more connected future. The next day unfolded in much the same way as the others had, but for Daniel, the crisp autumn air seemed charged with an electric sense of possibility. The cool breeze tugged at the edges of his jacket as he made his way through the familiar paths of the park, his mind buzzing with anticipation. Each crunch of the fallen leaves beneath his feet echoed in his thoughts, creating a rhythmic backdrop as he walked, lost in his own world. Today, however, something felt different. The air was alive with a quiet expectancy, and Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something special was just around the corner. As he approached the park, he decided to take a different route from his usual path. This small detour led him to a quiet, shaded corner of the park where an old, isolated bench stood, one that he had rarely noticed before. This was the very bench where the homeless old man would sit with his loyal black dog, a pair that had become a beacon of warmth in Daniel's life. Memories of their simple companionship filled his mind as he approached the bench. Over the past days, he had come to think of them as more than just park regulars. They had brought light into his quiet world, a world that often felt lonely and detached. That morning, as he was getting ready for school, his mother had lovingly placed an apple in his backpack, reminding him to eat something nutritious during the day. When Daniel held the apple in his hands, a thought struck him. This apple could be more than just a snack for him. It could be a small gesture of gratitude, a token of friendship. It seemed like the perfect way to acknowledge the quiet joy the old man and his dog had unknowingly brought into his life. With that thought in mind, Daniel headed to the bench. But when he arrived, the familiar pair wasn't there yet. The bench sat empty, bathed in the soft morning light filtering through the trees. Glancing around to make sure no one was watching, Daniel carefully placed the apple on the bench. It wasn't just a piece of fruit anymore. It had become a silent offering of kindness, a way to say thank you without words. His heart beat faster as he stepped back, a mixture of excitement and nervousness bubbling up inside him. Finding a spot nearby, Daniel sat down on the ground, hiding in the shadows of the trees, where he could watch the bench without being seen. His heart pounded in his chest as he waited, every minute stretching out like an eternity. The park was still and quiet, the only sound coming from the wind as it rustled through the fallen leaves, creating a soft, natural symphony. Daniel's eyes never left the bench, his anticipation growing with each passing second. Finally, just as the sun began to climb higher in the sky, warming the chilly air, Daniel heard the soft sound of footsteps. His breath caught in his throat as he saw the familiar figures of the old man and his dog approaching the bench. He watched, barely daring to breathe, as they reached the bench and the old man's eyes fell upon the apple. The man paused, clearly surprised, and looked around, as if searching for the person who had left the gift. His puzzled expression slowly melted into a gentle smile as he picked up the apple, turning it over in his hands as if it were a rare treasure. With a warmth in his gaze, the old man broke the apple in half, offering one piece to his loyal companion. The dog eagerly caught the fruit, happily chewing it as his tail wagged in contentment. The old man, still smiling, sat down on the bench and began to eat his half of the apple, savoring the simple pleasure of the moment. To anyone else, it might have seemed like an ordinary scene, but to Daniel, it was filled with deep significance. His small act of kindness had reached someone else's life, creating a connection that required no words. As Daniel watched from his hidden spot, a profound warmth spread through his chest. He had done something kind, something meaningful, and it filled him with a sense of quiet joy. The sight of the old man and his dog enjoying the apple made Daniel realize that even the smallest gestures could brighten someone's day, maybe even change their entire outlook. The world, which had often felt distant and unreachable, suddenly seemed closer, more connected. Sitting under the old oak tree, Daniel felt a renewed sense of belonging, a newfound confidence that he, too, could make a difference, even in the simplest of ways. The day wore on, but the echo of that small moment lingered in Daniel's soul, filling him with a deep sense of fulfillment. It was as if a spark had been ignited within him, a spark that gave him hope for the future. The old man and his dog had become more than just part of his routine. They were now a guiding light, a symbol of the kind of person Daniel wanted to be. And with that thought, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. This would not be the last time he shared a small act of kindness with the world. Tomorrow he would return to the park, ready to continue this new tradition. He would keep watching, keep waiting, and keep dreaming of the day when he would find his own loyal companion, with whom he could share not only an apple but the joys and sorrows of life. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Daniel finally rose from his spot under the tree. He glanced one last time at the old man and his dog, now resting peacefully on the bench, and smiled to himself. The day had ended, but the impact of his small gesture remained, filling him with a quiet confidence and a heart full of hope for what tomorrow might bring. The soft morning light barely brushed the tops of the oak leaves as Daniel made his way to the park once again. Over the past few days, something had quietly shifted in his routine. His solitude, once a comfort in its predictability, had begun to transform into something more, a secret ritual infused with purpose. His encounters with the homeless old man and his dog had become the highlight of his days. Each morning, he would carefully select the most beautiful apple he could find, and with a mixture of hope and anticipation, he would place it on the bench before they arrived. This particular morning was cool but carried the promise of a pleasant day ahead. The air, crisp and fresh, hinted at the arrival of autumn, and the trees were beginning their slow transformation from lush green to shades of gold and copper. The park was quiet, with only the occasional rustle of squirrels darting about, adding life to the stillness. Daniel had risen early and made his way to the kitchen, where his mother had filled a basket with fresh fruit the day before. After much deliberation, he selected an apple, its skin smooth and glistening, its shape perfectly round. As he held it in his hands, he felt a warm sense of purpose. What he was doing wasn't just an ordinary act, it was something meaningful, a small but powerful gesture that connected him to someone else's life. With the apple in his hand, Daniel approached the familiar bench. He could feel the cold metal beneath his fingers as he gently placed the apple on the seat, as if it were a precious offering. Quickly, he darted behind a nearby tree, his heart racing with anticipation. The moments ticked by slowly, each second feeling longer than the last. But then, he heard the familiar sound of soft footsteps approaching. He peeked out from his hiding spot just in time to see the old man and his loyal dog making their way toward the bench. Daniel held his breath, watching intently as the old man's eyes fell upon the apple. For a moment, the man stood still, a look of surprise spreading across his weathered face, and then, slowly, a smile crept across his lips. His tired eyes seemed to sparkle with a mixture of joy and wonder, as if he had stumbled upon something magical. Daniel felt a surge of warmth in his chest. He had done this. His small gesture had brought happiness to someone else's day. The old man, as was his habit, carefully picked up the apple and split it in half. The dog, already familiar with the routine, sat eagerly at his side, waiting for its share. The man offered one half to his faithful companion, who happily devoured it, tail wagging in gratitude. The old man, still smiling, sat down on the bench and took a bite of his half. It was such a simple act, but to Daniel it was profound. In that quiet moment, he felt an invisible connection to the old man and his dog. Though he remained hidden in the shadows, he was part of their world, even if they didn't know it. As the man and his dog finished their modest snack, something unexpected happened. The old man, instead of standing up and leaving as usual, paused for a moment. He looked around thoughtfully, his gaze eventually settling on the tree where Daniel was hiding. The boy's heart skipped a beat. Did he know? Could he sense that someone was watching? Daniel pressed himself closer to the tree, trying to remain unseen, but the old man simply smiled a soft, knowing smile and whispered something to his dog. Then, without another glance, they both set off down the path, disappearing into the distance. In the days that followed, Daniel's secret connection with the homeless man and his dog deepened. Each visit to the park became more than just an opportunity to leave an apple. It became a lesson in the quiet beauty of life's simplest moments. Daniel began to notice the little details, the way the old man spoke to his dog with such tenderness, as though the dog were his dearest friend, the way the dog's eyes followed its owner's every move, filled with unwavering loyalty. These moments, small as they were, taught Daniel more about friendship and devotion than any book ever could. He began to understand that true friendship wasn't just about grand gestures, it was about being there for someone, every day, in the little ways that mattered most. That day in the park started like any other. The sun had risen higher, warming the cool morning air, and a gentle breeze played with Daniel's hair as he made his way along the familiar path. In his hand, he held another apple, fresh and crisp, its skin dotted with tiny droplets of dew that sparkled like stars in the morning light. But as he approached the bench, something caught his eye. His usual spot was no longer empty. A figure sat there, and Daniel's heart sank for a moment, fearing that his ritual had been interrupted. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and curiosity swirling through his mind as he watched the scene unfold before him. A young man, impeccably dressed in a sharp, elegant suit, sat on the bench that had once been the domain of the old man and his dog. Beside him stood a tall figure dressed in black, unmistakably a bodyguard, his posture rigid and alert. Daniel froze in the shadow of the trees, hiding from view, his mind racing with questions. Who were these people? Why were they here, occupying the spot that had become so special to him? He clutched the apple in his hand, the coolness of its skin grounding him as his nerves began to fray. The man on the bench kept glancing at his watch, his expression an uneasy blend of anxiety and impatience. The bodyguard stood a short distance away, his eyes scanning the park with a steely, unblinking gaze, ready to intercept any potential threat. Then, as if pushed to the edge by some unseen pressure, the young man buried his face in his hands, clearly distressed. He muttered something to the bodyguard before springing to his feet and pacing back and forth along the path, his steps quick and agitated. The bodyguard remained rooted to his spot, his watchful eyes never leaving the surroundings. From his hiding place, Daniel's heart raced even faster, each thud echoing in his ears. A rush of adrenaline surged through him, urging him to step closer, to uncover the mystery behind these strangers. But the fear of being caught in an awkward, or even dangerous situation kept him rooted behind the thick curtain of green bushes. He peered through the leaves, watching the young man in the suit, who now seemed lost in his own troubled thoughts, staring into the distance with a haunted expression. The tension in the air was almost palpable, thickening with every second, making Daniel's breath come in shallow, nervous bursts. Time seemed to drag on endlessly. Each minute felt like an eternity, and with every passing moment, the unease in Daniel's chest grew heavier, like a gathering storm on the horizon. He couldn't stop thinking about the old man and his dog. Where were they? Why hadn't they shown up today? They were usually so predictable, so reliable in their routine. The bench had always been their place, a small sanctuary in the midst of the bustling park. But today, their absence was a mystery that Daniel felt compelled to solve. His imagination began to conjure up dramatic scenarios. Maybe the old man and his dog had encountered these strangers on their way to the park, and sensing danger, had decided to take a different route. Or perhaps something more sinister was at play. The idea that these suited figures could have malevolent intentions filled Daniel with a cold, creeping dread. Who are these people, he wondered, his thoughts spiraling. What are they doing here? And why this particular bench? What could they possibly want? The questions tumbled through his mind, relentless and unsettling, leaving him with a gnawing sense of unease. And then, as if to heighten his anxiety, the pattern repeated itself the next day, and the day after that. Every morning, the man in the suit appeared at the park, accompanied by his silent bodyguard, occupying the bench at the exact same time. And each day, after a period of waiting, they would abruptly stand and leave, their departure as enigmatic as their arrival, leaving behind only a trail of unanswered questions and a deepening sense of uncertainty in Daniel's heart. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. As Daniel approached his favorite bench, no longer expecting to see the old man and his dog, he found the man in the suit there once again. But this time, something was different. This time, the man noticed him. For the first time in all these strange encounters, their eyes met. Daniel's heart skipped a beat, his body tensing in anticipation of what might happen next. "Hey, kid," the man called out, his voice unexpectedly gentle, a stark contrast to his imposing appearance. Daniel hesitated, startled by the softness in the man's tone. "I know you come here regularly. My people see you here almost every day. Tell me, have you seen an old homeless man with a large black dog around here?" The question took Daniel completely by surprise. Seen him? Of course he had seen him. He hadn't just seen the old man, he had watched him every day, observed the bond he shared with his dog, how they played together, how they shared their meager meals. But why was this well-dressed man, with his bodyguard and air of authority, interested in a homeless person? What could possibly connect them? And why was this now involving him, a little boy who had been content to remain unnoticed? A whirlwind of thoughts swirled in Daniel's mind. What should he say? Should he tell the truth or keep the old man's secret? The fear of the unknown gripped him, but so did an intense curiosity. He wanted to understand the connection, to unravel the mystery that had suddenly woven itself into his quiet world. The boy stood there, frozen in place, caught between the desire to protect the old man and the need to satisfy his own growing curiosity. And so, with the apple still clutched in his hand and a trembling breath, Daniel prepared himself for whatever might come next. Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat as he tried to steady his breathing. Swallowing hard, he cautiously answered the man, doing his best to hide the anxiety that gripped him. His curiosity warred with the nervousness bubbling inside, leaving his thoughts in a chaotic swirl of doubts and suspicions. So, this is the man who has been watching and waiting all these days, Daniel thought, his mind flickering with a series of dramatic possibilities. But why? Why did this polished man care about the old homeless man and his dog? His imagination began to paint all kinds of scenarios, each more outlandish than the last. Maybe the old man stole his wallet or something even more valuable, and now this guy wants revenge, Daniel speculated, glancing up at the man's intense gaze. The seriousness in the stranger's eyes only deepened Daniel's unease. Or what if he's from some kind of medical clinic, ready to do anything for a valuable catch? Daniel remembered his father mentioning something about the black market for organs while reading an article. His father had said that homeless people were often the most vulnerable, easy prey for those who would exploit them. What if these people are after his liver or something else? The thought sent a shiver down Daniel's spine, and he instinctively clenched his fists in fear. Sensing the boy's fear and suspicion, the man in the suit softened his expression and offered a reassuring smile. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if trying not to startle Daniel. Reaching into the inner pocket of his jacket, he pulled out an old, yellowed photograph. "Don't be afraid of me," the man said gently, his voice calm and soothing. "I'm not here to harm anyone. I come in peace." He handed the photo to Daniel with a steady hand. "This is my father. Take a look." Daniel hesitated for a moment before taking the photograph. He studied it closely, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of the image. It was almost impossible for him to connect the man in the photo with the old homeless man he had seen so many times in the park. The photograph showed a man in his prime, elegantly dressed, his hair perfectly styled, his face clean-shaven and full of life. In his hand, he held the small hand of a boy who appeared to be around Daniel's age. The boy's gaze was filled with innocence and hope, and as Daniel looked closer, he realized with a jolt that this boy was none other than the younger version of the serious man standing before him now. "You see, kid," the man began, his voice laced with regret and sadness. "My father and I had a falling out many years ago." He paused, his gaze drifting toward the horizon as if lost in a sea of memories. "I was always hot-tempered, quick to anger, never able to control my emotions. I thought I knew better than everyone else, especially my parents. I was rude to them, mocked their ways, convinced that all their customs and advice were just outdated relics of a bygone era. I believed I understood life better than they ever could, and I was certain of my superiority." He paused for a moment, his eyes reflecting the weight of his words, then continued. "I left my parents' home early, unable to stand their moralizing any longer. I was determined to make my own way in the world, to prove that I didn't need them. I started my own business, thinking that success and money were the keys to happiness. At first, it seemed like I was right. Everything was going smoothly. Money came in faster than I could spend it. I indulged in every luxury, expensive restaurants, designer suits, the company of powerful and beautiful people. My father, though, he warned me. He told me to be careful, to invest in the future instead of wasting it all. But I was too arrogant to listen." The man's voice faltered for a moment as he relived the mistakes of his past. "I thought I was invincible, at the top of the world. I believed that no obstacle could stop me. I was blinded by my own pride, convinced that I had it all figured out." Daniel listened intently, captivated by the man's story. The harshness of life had left its mark on the man's face, and as he spoke, Daniel could hear the weight of his regrets. This wasn't just a story about wealth and success, it was about a relationship that had been broken, about a son who had lost his way and was now seeking something more precious than all the money in the world: reconciliation. As the man continued, Daniel began to feel the tension in his own body ease, replaced by a growing sense of empathy. He realized that this stranger wasn't the villain his imagination had conjured up. This was a man searching for something far more meaningful than revenge or wealth. And as Daniel stood there, holding the photograph in his small hands, he couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, he had a part to play in this story, a chance to help mend something that had been broken for so long. The man's voice quivered, carrying the weight of countless unspoken regrets and long overdue realizations. His weary eyes glistened with the shadows of a past filled with missed chances and painful lessons, making Daniel see the man standing before him in a profoundly different way. There was a moment of silence, A pause as if he was trying to push away the crushing burden of his memories before he could find the strength to continue. I became entangled in the world of casinos, the man confessed, his voice laden with sorrow. At first, it felt like luck was on my side. But soon the stakes escalated beyond my control. I started losing sums that I couldn't afford to part with. But that was just the beginning of my downfall. The real test came when I entered a tumultuous relationship with a young woman whose father wielded considerable power. Our brief affair, which I had foolishly thought would remain inconsequential, turned into something much more when she became pregnant. I was consumed by my ambition, and the idea of settling down and starting a family terrified me. I had just broken free from the suffocating grip of my parents' expectations and couldn't imagine chaining myself to anything permanent. So I made the selfish choice to walk away. A shadow of anguish crossed his face as he recalled the chain of events that followed. Her father found out and made sure I paid the price for my reckless decisions. He dismantled my company, leaving me drowning in debt. The creditors were relentless, hounding me day and night. Their threats weren't just words, they were real, and they targeted not just me but my family too. The man's voice broke for a moment, overwhelmed by the weight of his own words. In my desperation, I turned to the one person I had always taken for granted, my father. I bared my soul to him, confessing every misstep, every failure. But the look of disappointment in his eyes, it cut deeper than any of the threats I'd received. He didn't care about the money. He cared about the fact that I had ignored all his guidance, that I had rejected his care and wisdom. He told me to come back the next day. The man continued, his voice growing quieter, and when I did, he had prepared the money I needed, despite the fact that his own affairs were in shambles. A few months later, when I went to see him again to express my gratitude, I found out the heartbreaking truth: he had sold his house and his business, giving me everything he had left, and then he vanished. With nowhere to go, I relocated to a different city and started anew, convincing myself that I needed to protect myself from the wreckage of my past. He took a deep breath, as if trying to steady himself. Over time, my life began to rebuild itself piece by piece. I managed to pull myself out of the abyss and started to recover. But the guilt of what I had done to my father haunted me. I searched everywhere for him, desperate to repay him, to show him that I had finally learned from my mistakes. But every lead turned cold. Then, just recently, an old friend of his reached out to me. He said he had seen my father in the park, walking a large black dog. That's when I realized I had to try to find him one last time. But every time I came to the park, he wasn't there. Maybe he saw me and decided he didn't want to see me. His voice faltered, and he inhaled deeply, attempting to hold back the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Please tell me, have you seen a man with a black dog around here? Does he resemble the man in this photo? His gaze, full of desperate hope, was fixed intently on the boy's face, searching for an answer that might bring him peace. The boy nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. Yes, I've seen him. It was definitely him, though he's changed a lot. He's got a thick black beard now, completely gray, but his eyes, those laughing eyes, they're exactly the same. I'm sure it's him, 100%. The boy said with a smile that hinted at wisdom beyond his years. The man exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Thank God, he whispered, relief flooding his features. But the relief was tinged with uncertainty. Now that I know he's alive, how do I meet him? The question hung in the air, heavy with longing and unresolved emotions. You should go home and find peace. No need to return here, the boy suggested with an air of wisdom beyond his years. I have a feeling that as long as you're here, he won't show up. You're quite noticeable, and with your security detail, it's hard not to feel a bit intimidated. If you leave your phone number with me, I can watch for him. I'm here almost every day, and if your father appears again, I'll speak with him. I'll make sure he knows you want to meet." The man nodded slowly, digesting the boy's words. "You're probably right," he said quietly. "After everything I've done, after the life I forced him into, he probably doesn't want to see me. But please, if you do see him, try to convince him to meet me. I would be deeply grateful." His voice carried a mix of genuine gratitude and a hollow emptiness, though a flicker of hope lingered in his eyes, as if he believed this boy might be the key to restoring the broken bond between father and son. Weeks passed, and there was no sign of the old man with the dog in the park. Despite the sinking feeling that perhaps he wouldn't return, the boy stayed true to his promise. Every day, he walked to the park, checking the bench where the man had once sat, determined to be there in case the old man returned. Then, one crisp autumn morning, when the wind danced through the golden leaves, the boy's heart leaped in his chest. There, in the usual spot, was the old man, sitting quietly with his faithful black dog lying beside him, soaking up the warmth of the sun's rays. The boy's pulse quickened as he reached into his backpack, pulling out an apple. He approached cautiously, a mix of excitement and nervousness in his step. "Good day to you," the boy greeted, his voice trembling as he held out the apple, offering it as a symbol of friendship and peace. The dog, sensing the approach of a stranger, let out a soft growl, protective and wary. "Easy, easy, boy," the old man murmured, his tone gentle but firm as he calmed the dog. His eyes, however, remained locked on the boy. "Don't be afraid of him," the old man said with a reassuring smile. "He's just doing his job, but he's friendly then." Recognition seemed to dawn on his face, and his smile deepened. "So it was you who's been leaving these apples for me all along." There was warmth in his voice, mixed with a touch of surprise. The old man's gaze softened further as he continued, "Well, let's finally introduce ourselves properly, my young friend. I'm sorry I haven't been around much lately. I had some things to take care of, and well, there was someone I've been trying to avoid." The unspoken tension lingered in the air, but his smile remained warm, a small bridge forming between past and present, stranger and friend. "I know everything," the boy said, his voice carrying an unexpected weight that immediately drew the old man's attention. The seriousness in his tone was unmistakable, and it hinted at the gravity of what he was about to reveal. "While you were away, I met your son. He loves you more than you realize. He misses you terribly, and he asked me to deliver a message. He wants me to apologize on his behalf." The old man's expression shifted as he heard the boy's words. His voice quivered as he responded, laden with a mixture of pain and confusion that had long festered within him. "So that's what this is all about," he murmured, his voice betraying the emotions he tried so hard to keep buried. "Do you even know what that boy did?" The hurt he caused, his words trembled on the edge of anger and sorrow, while his eyes, already misted with tears, held the weight of countless sleepless nights spent grappling with memories. The boy, sensing the depth of the old man's inner turmoil, nodded with quiet understanding. "Yes, I know," he said gently, his voice filled with compassion. "He told me everything. He opened up to me, shared his regrets, and I believe the time has come for you to let go of the hurt. It's time to give him the chance to apologize, to make things right. He's not the same person he once was. People change, they grow. And your son has done just that. He's reconnected with your grandson, and he's been doing all he can to help him. And if the woman who bore him that child can forgive him for all the hurt he caused her, if she can move past it and find peace, then maybe, just maybe, you can find it in your heart to forgive him too. Or at least give it a try," the boy urged, his words infused with earnest sincerity, hoping to break through the wall of pain that had surrounded the old man's heart for so long. The old man's hardened exterior softened at the boy's words. A glimmer of hope, long extinguished, began to flicker faintly in his chest. His voice, now tinged with vulnerability, trembled as he asked, "Do you really believe he's changed? That he's become a better man?" The boy met his gaze with unwavering confidence, his eyes shining with a quiet assurance. "Yes," he said with conviction. "I truly believe he's changed. He's worked hard to become a better person. I swear it." He allowed a small, reassuring smile to lift the corners of his mouth, trying to lighten the tension that hung between them. "And I think he deserves the chance to show you that he's different now." A deep sigh escaped the old man, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He nodded slowly, surrendering to the idea that perhaps, after all these years, healing was possible. "All right," he said at last, his voice steady but soft. Tell him I'm ready. I'll be waiting for him here tomorrow." At the same time with that, he gave a final nod, signaling his willingness to open the door to reconciliation, no matter how uncertain the path ahead might be. The next morning arrived with a gentle warmth, the park bathed in the golden light of the early sun. The air, still tinged with the coolness of dawn, seemed to carry a sense of anticipation, as if nature itself understood the significance of what was about to unfold. The old man sat on the familiar bench, his hands resting on his lap, fidgeting slightly with the nervous energy that coursed through him. His heart raced with a mixture of anxiety and hope as he waited for the arrival of the son he had longed to see, yet feared to face. The son approached slowly, each step heavy with the weight of the years that had passed between them. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind swirling with memories of past mistakes and the overwhelming desire to make things right. His steps were hesitant, but his eyes were filled with determination, a determination to bridge the gap that had kept them apart for so long. As he drew nearer, their eyes met a brief, intense moment of connection that spoke volumes without a single word being exchanged. The tension between them was palpable, thick with years of unspoken hurt, but also laced with the faintest glimmer of hope. A silence hung in the air, stretching on for what felt like an eternity, before they finally moved toward each other. At first, their embrace was cautious, tentative, as if they were afraid of reopening old wounds. But as the seconds ticked by, the embrace grew stronger, tighter, filled with the unspoken longing for the time they had lost, and the forgiveness they both so desperately craved. It was their first true connection in years, an embrace that spoke of regret, of healing, and of a deep, unspoken love that had never truly faded. "Dad," the son began, his voice barely above a whisper, trembling with the weight of everything he wanted to say. "I've imagined this moment so many times in my head, but now that it's real, I don't even know where to start." The father, his voice soft and gentle, replied with the wisdom of a man who had seen his fair share of life's hardships. "Just speak, son. We've both made our share of mistakes, and I'm in no position to judge you. All that matters now is that you're here, and for that, I'm grateful." His words, though simple, held a profound sense of understanding, and they seemed to ease the tension between them. And so, with the weight of the past beginning to lift, they started to talk, a conversation that marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one filled with the possibility of healing, of forgiveness, and of the hope that they could rebuild the bond that had been lost for so many years. The son began to open up, speaking candidly about his travels, the many mistakes he had made along the way, and how, despite the life he had built, there was always an emptiness inside him where his father's presence should have been. He spoke of his business ventures, of the successes that had briefly lifted his spirits, and of the failures that had knocked him down. Every time he faced adversity, he found himself remembering his father's words, the lessons ingrained in him from childhood, the wisdom he had once taken for granted. As the son spoke, the father listened intently, his weathered face softening with every word. When it was his turn, he shared his own journey, the winding path that had led him to a life far removed from the one he once knew. He told his son about losing everything, his home, his possessions, but finding a strange kind of peace in the simplicity that followed. He found solace in the little things, the companionship of a stray dog that had wandered into his life and become his loyal friend, the quiet comfort of routine, and the small yet heartwarming gestures from strangers, like the apples that mysteriously appeared on his park bench every morning, left by someone whose kindness had restored his faith in the goodness of people. Their conversation inevitably turned to the wounds of the past, to the grievances that had driven them apart. It was a difficult topic, but one that had to be faced. Both father and son found the strength to admit their faults, to look each other in the eyes and say the words that had been left unspoken for so many years. The son, his voice thick with emotion, apologized for his pride and stubbornness, for the times he had refused to listen to his father's guidance, convinced that he knew better. He regretted the distance he had allowed to grow between them, the years lost to silence and misunderstanding. The father, in turn, acknowledged his own mistakes. He spoke of the regret that had weighed on him for so long, the regret of being too strict, too rigid in his ways. He had tried to mold his son into someone who could succeed in the world, but in doing so, he had failed to support him when it mattered most. "I was always proud of you," the father said, his voice cracking as he reached out and squeezed his son's hands. "I'm so sorry that I didn't know how to show it." The son's eyes glistened as he met his father's gaze. "I'm proud of you too, Dad," he replied earnestly. "And I'm grateful for all the lessons you taught me, even if it took me far too long to understand them." As they walked side by side through the park, the conversation gradually shifted from past regrets to hopes for the future. They shared tentative plans, ideas that hinted at the possibility of rebuilding what had been lost. The son, with a hopeful smile, suggested that his father come back home, that they start fresh and begin a new chapter together. The father listened, his heart torn between the freedom he had grown accustomed to and the desire to heal the wounds of the past. His eyes flickered with uncertainty, but also with a longing for the connection he had once thought was lost forever. After a long pause, the father finally spoke, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "Let's give it a try," he said, a small but hopeful smile forming on his lips. Maybe this is the second chance I've been dreaming of." They continued walking, their steps lighter than before, as if the weight of the past had begun to lift from their shoulders. The silence between them was no longer filled with tension, but with a newfound understanding. As they moved forward, the world around them seemed less daunting, less lonely than it had in years. Together they were building bridges connecting the past to the present and laying the foundation for a future where they would no longer walk alone. As Daniel returned home on that crisp autumn evening, something profound began to stir within him. His heart, once filled with the simplicity of childhood thoughts, was now awakening to a deeper understanding of life, of the intricate weave of family bonds, of relationships that span time and hardship, and of the values that bind people together. The chance encounter at the park, witnessing the poignant reunion between a weathered old man and his estranged son, had sparked something in Daniel's soul. It had cast a new light on his own life, his own family, and especially his relationship with his father. He couldn't shake the thoughts that clung to him as he walked home. His mind wandered back to memories of his father, to all the times he had misunderstood the worry in his father's eyes, dismissed the advice as unnecessary caution. He had often felt that his father was distant, uninterested in what mattered to him, especially when it came to the simple wish of having a dog. But now, with fresh perspective, Daniel began to wonder if he had been seeing things through the narrow lens of his own desires, missing the deeper reasons behind his father's actions. Stepping into the quiet of his home, Daniel was greeted by the familiar stillness. His father was still at work, and for the first time, Daniel welcomed the solitude. It gave him space to sit with his thoughts, to reflect on the day that had just passed. He climbed the stairs to his room, settled into his usual spot by the window, and replayed the scenes of the park in his mind, the father and son, their emotional reunion, and the unspoken history that had hung between them. It made him see his own father in a different light, with new eyes that were beginning to understand the weight of fatherhood, the silent burdens that fathers carry. Maybe I've been too harsh on him, Daniel thought, his heart heavy with the realization. Maybe there are things he's had to face that I don't even know about. These questions gnawed at him, unsettling his mind. He had always assumed that his father's reluctance to get him a dog was just a lack of interest in his happiness. But now, after witnessing the complexity of another father-son relationship, Daniel felt a deep urge to seek understanding, to bridge the gap that had quietly formed between them. In the days that followed, something shifted in Daniel. He began making an effort to connect with his father in ways he hadn't before. He would sit with him after work, asking about his day, showing genuine interest in his father's life. He started helping more around the house, noticing the small signs of exhaustion in his father's movements, the quiet moments of care that had always been there but had gone unnoticed by his younger self. With each conversation, with each shared moment, Daniel felt the walls that had once stood between them start to crumble, brick by brick. Months passed, and before long, Daniel's birthday arrived. He was turning 9, an age that now felt so much more significant, so much more filled with understanding. This birthday, however, was unlike any other he had experienced. That morning, when his father handed him a large, neatly wrapped box, Daniel's heart pounded with excitement and anticipation. When he carefully lifted the lid, a small, fluffy puppy with large, endearing ears tumbled out, its playful energy immediately filling the room with joy. His father knelt beside him, tears glistening in his eyes as he smiled. "I thought you'd earned him, son," his father said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've seen how hard you've tried to understand me, how much you've grown. This puppy isn't just a gift, it's a symbol of our understanding, of the forgiveness we found in each other. He'll grow up with you, and I hope he brings as much happiness into this home as you've brought to me." The weight of his father's words struck Daniel deeply. In that moment, he realized the true power of forgiveness, of understanding, and of the unconditional love that forms the foundation of any strong relationship. Holding the small, warm puppy in his arms, Daniel silently vowed to be as loyal and caring a friend to his new pet as his father had been to him. This birthday, unlike any other, marked a turning point, a new beginning for both of them. From that day on, their bond grew stronger, rooted in mutual respect and love. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel and his father continued to walk through life together, side by side with their new companion, a puppy named Charlie. They talked more, laughed more, and though they occasionally quarreled, as all families do, they knew now that they could always find their way back to one another. Forgiveness had become their bridge, and it was one they were both willing to cross whenever necessary. One cool autumn day, the park was ablaze with the vibrant colors of falling leaves, golden yellows, fiery reds, and deep oranges. Daniel, his father, and Charlie strolled through the park, enjoying the crisp air and the beauty of the season. As they walked, Daniel noticed a familiar figure in the distance. The man who had once seemed so ragged and downtrodden, the vagrant from that fateful day, now appeared completely transformed. His clothes were neat, his face clean and content. Beside him, his loyal black dog trotted happily, and on the other side walked his son, now dressed in a sharp, elegant suit. The change was striking, a testament to the healing power of family, of forgiveness, and of second chances. Daniel glanced up at his father, who met his gaze with a knowing smile. No words were needed, they both understood the profound truth that connected them all, that the bonds of love, once broken, could always be mended, and that even in the face of life's hardships, there was always the possibility of renewal. Together they walked on, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing they would never again face it alone. The unexpected meeting brought a ripple of excitement through the crisp autumn air, and Daniel, eager to share this moment, decided to introduce his father to the familiar faces from the park. His heart swelled with pride as he watched his father, Richard, approach the man who had once seemed so lost, now standing before them with a new sense of purpose. Richard, ever the warm and welcoming presence, extended his hand with a friendly smile. "Hello, my name is Richard," he said, his tone open and kind. "Daniel has spoken about you often, about your meetings here in the park. It's wonderful to see you looking so well." The man, Edward, returned the smile and grasped Richard's hand firmly. "Hello, Richard. My name is Edward, and this is my son, Jonathan." He paused for a moment, glancing at Daniel with a look of deep gratitude. "Your son did something for me that I can never fully repay. He left apples on that bench when I had nothing, and that simple act of kindness helped me find my way back to a normal life. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me." Richard's expression softened with admiration as he listened to Edward's words. "I'm so glad to hear that," Richard said, his voice filled with sincerity. "It's incredible how a small act of kindness can have such a profound impact. Daniel has always had a big heart, and I'm proud that he was able to be a part of your journey." Jonathan, who had been standing quietly beside his father, stepped forward, his face reflecting the gratitude that mirrored Edward's. "We are truly thankful for your son's friendship and kindness," Jonathan added. "It inspired me to take responsibility for my own life and make the changes that were long overdue. Without that spark, I'm not sure where we'd be today." The two fathers, now united by their mutual respect and shared experiences, began to exchange stories about raising their sons. They spoke of the challenges and rewards that come with fatherhood, the struggles they had faced, and the lessons they had learned along the way. Daniel stood nearby, holding Charlie's leash as the dog wagged his tail with infectious joy, as if sensing the calm and warmth of the moment. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and before long, the men were exchanging phone numbers, knowing that this was the beginning of a new friendship that would undoubtedly bring more joy and shared experiences to their lives. As they continued their walk, Daniel felt a deep sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. The events of that day had unfolded in ways he couldn't have imagined, and yet it all made perfect sense. He realized that true change often starts with the simplest of actions: a kind word, a small gesture of generosity, and that those seemingly insignificant moments could ripple out, creating profound transformations in the lives of others. In the weeks that followed, the bond between Daniel, his father, and their loyal companion, Charlie, grew stronger with each passing day. Their walks in the park became a cherished routine, a time for reflection, connection, and quiet joy. Daniel often found himself thinking back to the earlier days when he would visit the park alone, lost in his thoughts and dreams. Now, his world had expanded to include the love of his family, the loyalty of his dog, and a newfound appreciation for the simple beauty of life. One crisp afternoon, as autumn's golden light filtered through the trees, Daniel and his father spotted Edward and Jonathan once again, sitting on the same bench where the old man and his dog had once rested. This time, there was a palpable sense of peace and contentment in the air. Edward looked healthier, his posture straighter, his face no longer marked by the weariness of his past. His eyes, once clouded with hardship, now shone with a quiet joy that came from a place of healing. As Daniel and his father approached, they were greeted with warm smiles. Edward patted his loyal black dog, who sat calmly by his side, a silent testament to the journey they had taken together. "It's good to see you both again," Edward said, his voice carrying the weight of gratitude and contentment. "These walks, they've become such an important part of my life now. They're a reminder of how far we've come, and it all started with the kindness your son showed me when I needed it most." Richard placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, pride swelling in his chest. "We're all part of this journey together," Richard said, his voice filled with warmth. "I'm grateful that we've crossed paths and that we can continue to share these moments." The two families sat together on the bench for a while longer, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company, the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze, and the presence of their loyal dogs by their sides. They had all come a long way from where they had started, and as they looked around at the beauty of the park, they knew that the connections they had forged here would continue to grow, bringing light and warmth to their lives. For Daniel, this journey had been one of discovery, not just of the world around him, but of the people in it, and most importantly, of the power that kindness and understanding held in transforming lives. And as he walked beside his father and Charlie, he knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, stronger and more connected than ever before. Jonathan, standing next to his father, nodded thoughtfully. It's incredible how small acts of kindness can change everything. I've been spending more time with my father, trying to make up for all the years we lost. And honestly, I owe so much of that to Daniel for helping to reconnect us. Daniel felt his cheeks warm with a shy blush, his heart swelling at their words. He glanced up at his father, who looked down at him with a gentle smile, pride shining in his eyes. "You've taught me a lot too, Dad," Daniel said softly, his voice carrying the weight of the lessons he'd learned. "I've realized that understanding and forgiveness can change so much. It can heal things that felt impossible to fix." Richard's hand rested on Daniel's shoulder, a gesture of both affection and respect. "And you've taught me, son, that sometimes it's the smallest gestures that have the biggest impact," he replied, his voice filled with warmth. There was a deep understanding in his words, a realization that echoed the quiet power of the connections they had formed. As the two families continued to talk, sharing stories, laughter, and reflections on their lives, Daniel felt something new and profound settle in his heart. The park, which had once been a place where he sought solace and escape, had now transformed into a space of connection, friendship, and fresh beginnings. It was no longer just a backdrop to his quiet moments of reading. It had become the setting for a real story, one that he was living. Later that evening, as Daniel lay in bed, he replayed the events of the past few months in his mind. The journey that had begun with him noticing the old man and his dog in the park had turned into something so much more. He realized that the stories he loved to read had come alive, woven into the very fabric of his own life. Loyalty, kindness, and courage weren't just traits of heroes in books. They were actions that could shape the real world, actions that had created bonds and changed lives. A gentle smile curved his lips as he drifted off to sleep, the warmth of the day's events lingering in his heart. He found comfort in the thought that even in the smallest corners of the world, in the quietest of places, kindness could spark ripples of change, ripples that could grow into waves of transformation. And with that thought, Daniel surrendered to the peaceful embrace of sleep, content with the knowledge that his small acts of kindness had made the world a little bit brighter. Now that we've reached the end of this emotional journey, we want to ask you, what have you learned from Daniel's story? Reflect on the moments that touched you the most and share in the comments below one thing you've learned and will bring to practice in your own life. If you like this video, please leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support means the world to us.